And next, we are also extremely honored. I had an opportunity to spend a little bit of time with this young Anishinaabe Kwe earlier, both today and last night, and she is an incredible, dynamic person who I heard about well before I came to this territory. She is from Northwestern Ontario and is currently doing her Master's in Communication and Social Justice at the University of Windsor. Spent some time in British Columbia as well, and is the Youth Executive for the National Association of Friendship Centers, and sits on the United Nations Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Wow. And she's only 23, which is amazing. So we are so honored and privileged to be with. Look at her, she just hates that she's embarrassed now. So Andrea Landry over there, so please welcome her. First? Okay, Andrea, go first. Okay.
Miigwech, Bonjour. Magizio de Kwe Dijnikas, Paisbat First Nation Donjaba, Makwadodem. My name is Andrea Landry. My traditional name is Magizio de Kwe. It means Eagle Heart Woman. I come from the traditional territory of Paisbat First Nation. I'm an Anishinaabe Kwe. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me the opportunity to speak at this event, for the elders for having their presence here, for grounding us in the teachings, for making us feel like we belong, for holding us close to our traditions and our culture. And miigwech for everybody in this room, for having the patience and for supporting us in the work that we do, because previously at a lot of these kinds of functions and events, I've seen a lot of Indigenous peoples being involved, and it's very rare that you'll see this divergence of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples coming together. So this unification, it's been prophesized, it's creating substantial change, and it's allowing us to have in-depth discussions that our ancestors never really thought could exist before. Our people are healing through teach-ins such as this, through events such as this. Our people are coming together and developing a better future. So I'd like to say miigwech. So I'd like to start off with some questions. We as Indigenous peoples have been attempted to be defined in a variety of ways. Has the Indian Act defined us? Has Section 35 defined us? Has the treaties in a foreign language of our own defined us? No, because the truth is the land defines us. It's what holds our traditional knowledge. It's what holds our traditional livelihood. It's what holds our inherent rights as Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples on this land that we call Canada. And it's by remembering this and honoring this that we can really come together and unilaterally work together and create a better future for our future generations. Because the work that we're doing and the way that we're mobilizing doesn't just impact Indigenous peoples. And many of us are starting to realize that. It impacts our non-Indigenous counterparts as well. Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your babies. And we all know how important it is for our future to have clean drinking water. We all know how important it is for our future to have their trap lines still intact. It's substantial for us as Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. But the difference is, as an Indigenous person, a non-Indigenous person will never know the connection to the land like that of my great-grandmother, who was a medicine woman. A non-Indigenous person will never understand the trap line and know it on the back of her hand with her eyes shut like my 9-year-old cousin. A non-Indigenous person will never understand that we cannot own land. Land is not a slave. If I were to own you, you would be my slave. So why would we do the same to land? Land is not a slave. The colonial thought and the processes in regards to land claims, rely on that concept. Why are we relying on the concept that land belongs to us? The reality is it belongs with us. We as Indigenous peoples, we live with the land. We don't live on the land. And this has been our traditional knowledge. This has been passed down from generations. And this is what makes us who we are. This is what allows us to expand and grow. This is what allows us to carry on our traditional knowledge and our inherent rights. By not allowing the land to be a slave, we are becoming more powerful. The concepts of economic development and all those ideologies that surround colonial thought that are based on the doctrine of discovery are things that we need to let go. I'm heavily involved with the United Nations. I attend the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as well as different expert group meetings for Indigenous youth. I represented North America in January at the United Nations in New York City through the expert group meeting on Indigenous youth. And I'd like to share a story of how different the thought processes are between the Canadian government and Indigenous peoples, Indigenous youth in particular. During that meeting, the Canadian government officials held a report, and their report stated that Bill C-45 was something they were doing and implementing to help Indigenous peoples. And they were saying, we're protecting their rights, we're allowing them to thrive, we're allowing them to be here. And I sat back, but I raised my hand and I spoke up. And I said, do you not know what's happening on the grassroots level in your country? Do you not see the grandmothers standing in minus 40 degrees, raising their voices? Do you not see the 18-year-old boys who are no longer partying and who are sitting by the drums now, sharing their songs and their stories? Do you not see why we're standing in unity? Bill C-45 is not helping us in any way, shape, or form. It's another assimilative agenda that the government is pushing against us. After I spoke up, the Canadian government official came up to me, handed me his card and said, next time you have something wrong that you want to discuss with me, send me an email. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. But it's cases such as this where we have to recognize that it's important that we utilize international systems. Because the more that the Canadian government spreads lies of who we are as Indigenous peoples and how we are to become identified as an Indigenous person, is something that international systems will believe. Yet if we're sitting at these tables and we're having these open, honest discussions, these dialogues, and we're representing ourselves, we're representing our ancestors, we're representing our future generations, that's when the truth will come out. And that's when they'll see how powerful we truly are as Indigenous peoples. A lot of people tend to be against the United Nations systems because they say it's a colonized system. But when you become a part of the system and you let your voice be represented and you tell stories of your great Mishomis or your great Gokumis, you realize there is substantial power there. You realize how integral it is for us as Indigenous peoples for our voices to be represented at all tables, as Chief White Duck had declared before. We need our voices represented on the international level, because without our voices there, what will change? What will happen? And the more pressure that gets put on to the Canadian government by these international mechanisms, the higher chance we have for international change. And through these international dialogues, we gain solidarity with other Indigenous groups from around the world. This is more than just about identity. This is more about our chance to really reevaluate how we are living as Indigenous peoples in Canada and on the international agenda. If we utilize the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and look at the free, prior, and informed consent, the concept of consent needs to surpass a one-way dialogue between a Canadian government official and one chief. We need consultation processes in part, to showcase that we deserve discussion. We no longer want land to be a slave to us. We need our voices represented at all these tables and all these agendas. And it's not just the youth that need to be heard, it's our great-grandparents. It's my grandfather who went to residential school. It's my grandfather who drank himself to death. He needs to be honored. That little boy who went to the residential school needs to be healed. And through these kinds of dialogues and these kinds of discussions, we can heal our ancestors. We can heal our future generations, and we can heal ourselves. Miigwech, all my relations.